Hi, I'm Namrata, and this is MedTech Juju, where we're going to talk about all things MedTech. So sign up and enjoy the ride.
Let's begin now.
You know, today, I just woke up and I
Like
said,
this.
you know, instead of waiting on a good day, waiting around through ups and downs, waiting on something to happen, I just said,
We're gonna have a good day, and all my homies gonna ride today.
that's right.
And all these mommies look fly today, and all we wanna do is get by today.
Hi, I'm
Have
Namrata,
a good day.
dentist, startup executive, and founder of Naminar Pro. This is MedTech Juju. Hey, MedTech world. Today, we're going to talk about the rising model of a device development. The rising model is something that's talked about during the quality management system phase of a device's development. It's a system that helps us understand how the user needs translate during the process of a device's growth and where it ends and how all of these are interconnected to each other to make sure that everything is on place, on time, and being done to a certain standard. I usually like the rising model because it's crisp and clear. There's lots of other models out there. You have the waterfall model, you have the V model, doesn't matter. What is essential to understand for beginners is why we actually need a model in the first place. What is it serving? What's essential to understand in the model is why is it needed and how is it helping us make a better device, and also structure the company in a way that it makes sense for each person to understand what step is next in the process for the given device. So in the rising model, usually we start with a design plan. So this is the ideation stage in which we know what kind of device we're going to build. And what comes next is the user needs. And we're doing a user needs assessment to that device plan. And once the design has been identified, you want to test it against a bunch of users, which are probably clinicians in some cases or laymen in some cases, depending on what your device is. And you want to validate the idea with as many users as you can early on in your device's development. What's important to understand is that the user needs need to be clear. At the end of this, you can't have vague user needs or you can't have too little user needs. You need to cover precisely what the user wants in such a device, which is the purpose of the user needs stage of a device's development. So capture that by talking to real clinicians or end users and get that data, make it crisp, and see where it fits in your design. Next, you have the design input stage. You're talking about, once you know the user needs, how is that translating into the input of the actual design of the device? So it's essential to convert those user needs into an actual input to the design of the device. So that could look something like, for example, a non-medical device example could be users like to have their coffee ready when they open the door of their house. They want the smell to be there the moment they enter, and they want their coffee nice and warm and ready. So that could go to the next level of, input for a coffee machine where you have an app. And the input would be make an app where the person could click a button, and the input becomes you have now given the command to the coffee machine to prepare the coffee. So that becomes an input because that's apparently a huge need that the market has. It's just a hypothetical. After the design input comes the design process. And in the design process stage, you are working on that design. Another example of a design input could be that, clinicians want a better grip on the device. So you're really thinking about what does that mean in terms of the actual design input for the device. What ergonomic factors are we including in the grip of our given prototype? When you're doing the design input stage, you can go to multiple resources to make sure that you're able to capture the different kinds of inputs that you need in order to translate them properly into a design. So you could go to, for example, go to the adverse event reports of competitor devices. That's a good place to go to because usually the users of your competitor have faced complaints and they've posted those complaints on, publicly available databases. And you can go and see what kind of complaints are your competitors facing, and you directly put that in your design input stage just to make sure that you're safeguarding yourself from similar complaints in the future. So all of that work goes in the design input. And you're essentially looking at the user needs by looking at every angle of where you can capture those user needs from. One part could be that you ran your own research with users. You ran a quick validation of your design with clinicians, for example, if clinicians are your end users, and you have that data. But also look into competitors, look into the complaints that your competitors are getting. That also becomes an interesting input for your design. What you want to do is you want to capture all the functional input that you need in order to be very confident that this is the design that I'm going for as a team, not I. It's a teamwork. Now, at this stage, we're still talking about the engineering teams, but what clinical and regulatory teams could already start thinking about are the intended use that you're going to define for the given device. This needs to be in line with the claims, the safety and performance claims that you want to design for your device at this stage. The sooner the better. And the goal is not to change those claims too much over the years. So keep it generic enough, but not too broad where regulators come back and say, that makes no sense. You need to be more specific. So this is a process that you would want to include, externals who worked in the medical device industry, help define claims for such devices, etc. You can also have experts within your own team who worked on similar devices and they bring that input to you. But it's good to have well-defined claims and a well-defined intended use early on. Then you have the design process stage where, again, you're continuing to work on that design process. And finally, that leads towards the design output. In the design process stage, you're thinking about not just the design of the device, but also things around it. So you're thinking about the shipping, the labeling, the packaging. And by the time you reach the design output stage, things are pretty much finalized. That means the design, you're reaching a design freeze stage, which means you're not going to touch the design of the device anymore. You're working towards it. You have your shipping, your labeling sorted out, and stuff like that. You have the device master record sorted out, and these are usually the things that you already have in place by the time you reach the design output stage. Now, what's important to understand is that there's something called the verification and validation of a device, or V&V in short. So if you go into a medical device company, you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, it's in the V&V stage. It's in the V&V stage. It's a long stage. If you want to learn a little bit more about the different stages of a device's development, then there is a link in the description below to another video of mine where I go into the details of that. So when you reach the design output stage, what happens is that you want to verify your design output with your design input. And that's usually called the design verification. So in that verification and validation, there are two separate things. Design verification is you're testing the design output and making sure that it actually meets with the design inputs that you set out in the beginning. What you don't want in this stage is that you ended up developing something that was deviating from what you decided on as essential design input features. Now, design verification is mandatory. You can't skip it. A good time to do the verification is after you've reached your design freeze. So you're not going to touch the design anymore, and now it's going to be tested following certain standards, probably in different labs, and your device is going to leave its home and go outside into the world to be tested against given standards to make sure that it is safe and that it performs as per its intended use that you defined. And then we have the design validation. The design validation is you are testing the final medical device against the user needs. So validation is essentially to make sure that this final device that you've now developed is actually meeting those user needs that you set out probably a few years ago by this point, and you want to make sure that it's matching. So that's the validation stage. How do we do a validation? It's usually done with samples from your initial lots of your medical device. Part of that validation could also be, clinical input. inputs. So you're running your studies to validate that your device is actually doing what the users needed. So plus you're also validating the fact that it's safe and performs as intended in humans, if that's where your device is intended to be used. And you're also validating that your device is safe and it performs as you had intended it to. So all of that is happening in the design validation stage. Usually you also send it to simulated environments during this stage. So you're sending your device packaging and certain imitating, acting out. If it falls to the ground, then is it broken? How strong is the packaging? And all that kind of stuff is done during the validation stage also. And during the verification and validation stage, you're also testing your device in simulated environments. So some of those simulated environments could be the transport of your actual device. If it's a device that is temperature sensitive, then what conditions will you simulate in order to test and make sure that the device doesn't, break down or suffer something during the transport of it? So you're simulating environments. You can also simulate environments in animal studies. You want to see if your device is performing as intended in animals. If it's a high-risk device, you also want to test them on humans. So after you've run all these other tests, at the end, you're going to be ready to test it on humans. And that's where the clinical study part of the whole medical device development stage comes in. And once all of this is done, comes the last stage, which is the design transfer. So everything has been validated. You have proven that your device is working on humans. You've run successful studies. You've got all the documentation in place, all the design records, the design history file. Everything is complete. And now you're going to transfer all of this information into the actual manufacturing of the device. This is where your device is going to start getting manufactured. So in this stage, you're going to have your manufacturing process instructions, and essentially you're taking everything that you compiled and giving it over to the manufacturing department. And they're going to ask for everything. I mean, literally everything that you've documented is given to them so that they can review it, verify it, and make sure that it can be manufactured properly according to the specifications that you set out for the final design of the device. And now mass production is basically going to begin. And I wanted to end this whole process by mentioning one thing, which is the design changes. And what the design changes essentially means is that at any point during the development of a device, you will come across certain changes that will have to happen. It's a natural part of any device's development. So that could mean later on in the process of development, you have a clinician or a group of clinicians who find that this length of the device is not working. You have to change it to X, right? And then you would take this change order and you would put it back into the system, and it needs to be documented. And then the whole process of verification, validation for that change needs to be redone if it's a significant change. Even if it's a non-significant change, it still needs to be recorded. And that's a very normal process in a device's development where you're talking about design changes. Keep in mind that every time a change is done to a design of a device, it could impact the risk assessment, it could impact the safety and performance of the device, the verification validation processes, even the biocompatibility if it's related to the material that you've changed. So in a nutshell, you're very hesitant to change the design if it's mature enough in the life cycle. What does that mean in a practical sense? I'll give you an example. Most of the clients that I've worked with, you will see a situation very often that when the design has reached a mature stage, it's almost about to be reaching a design freeze. And lo and behold, you get access to this very well-known key opinion leader who's right up there in their field. And they look at the design and they state something very obvious to them. And they'll say, oh, you know what, this might not work. You have to change the design. Now, for a key opinion leader, they're saying something that makes a lot of sense to them because they've been using similar devices for decades by that time. And therefore, in the teams, it becomes a point of stress sometimes because management will say, oh, that key opinion leader said XYZ. We need to change the design because we don't want a situation where end users won't buy it because it's that big of a requirement for the end user. So there's a little bit of panic that happens, especially in smaller companies, that crap, we forgot to put this design feature in. Why didn't we think of it? Why didn't we capture this sooner? So for example, I'm a dentist and most of the work I do is with dental devices now. And I'm the person who steps in knowing what the change process actually looks like because I know that it's going to take months before this actual change happens, because sometimes if it's a significant change, I am aware that it needs to go through so many different steps all over again before you get the final new design, which can then be translated to the next stage. So instead of doing that, my job usually as a consultant becomes, let's think of alternate options. Do you really need to make this change in this version? What if we mitigate the risk by doing X, Y, Z? So that's where having a consultant who knows the industry well, who's worked on both sides of the table as a clinician or as an external consultant for regulatory clinical marketing, it makes sense to engage those people before you actually jump on any opinion that you get from even the most well-known people. It's understandable because key opinion leaders are not trained on how the medical device is actually built. They know how to use the device, but they don't know how it's made and what are the key stakeholders, how long it takes to do a change process. So understandably so, it's important to have the right people in your team so that you don't get stuck in that never-ending loop of changes. So that's the rising model of a medical device's development. It starts with a design plan, which then moves on to the user needs, which then moves on to the design input, which moves on to the design process, moves on to the design output, and then you have your medical device ready, which then moves on to design transfer. And the design verification is between design output, making sure that it matches the design inputs. That's your verification. And then you want to make sure that your final medical device is actually meeting the user needs. That's your design validation stage. During this whole process, one thing I forgot to mention is that there's something called a design review. So each stage is being reviewed during the design review stage. Each step that I just mentioned has an overall process where we're making sure that everything is cohesive with each other. So in the design review, you're making sure that the safety needs are being addressed properly. You're seeing whether the materials and the components and all the other factors are adequately considered. Are they at inadequate amounts? So you're going through every aspect of each step just to make sure that it makes sense and it's still connecting one with the other. That's your design review. And it's a documented process and it's mandatory. So with that, I end today's video. If you want to see more content around medical device development or clinical studies, regulatory, then follow the channel and I'll see you next time. Ciao.